Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Martin Luther King Jr. set an example through his inspirational Letter from a Birmingham Jail, written in April of 1963, which motivated the black men and women of Birmingham, Alabama, to take a stand against white supremacists. King and his fellow African-American activists used nonviolent protesting to fight for their robbed constitutional rights and eventually achieved the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister who became a leader in the 1960s civil rights movement. He is well remembered today for his nonviolent philosophies of protesting. King was deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi worked for the rights of Indians and believed in nonviolence. King was also influenced by Christian humanism. In the early 1960s, Birmingham was one of the most segregated cities in all of America. 40% of Birmingham's 340,000 inhabitants were African American. George Wallace, the Alabama governor, stated that he would do anything in his power to keep segregation present in Alabama. King saw how unlawful segregation was and how unfair it was that it was being allowed in southern states. On April 3rd, King's Southern Christian Leadership Council and the ACMHR began a large-scale, nonviolent campaign of protests marked by sit-ins, marches, and boycotting.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
King had a strong base of supporters. The black community of the United States knew about him and followed his teachings. King was imprisoned in 1963 upon his arrival in Birmingham for violating an order prohibiting demonstrations. It was during his jail time that he wrote his infamous Letter from a Birmingham Jail. King wrote his letter in response to 8 white Alabama clergymen who told King and all of his followers to wait and be patient. They were always told to just keep waiting and suffering until their time came, but their time would never come.
For years now I have heard the word, wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. There will be young high school and college students, young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders, courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage.
King emphasizes that the sit-ins being demonstrated are demonstrations of the best of the American people. It was done with no ill intentions and had a pure goal. The only thing that can change the way people think on a topic is to start a revolution.
Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber.
King was a man that felt the need to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. He knew that freedom is a privilege that is not given kindly, it must be taken. In King's case, the entire black community had to protect their fellow citizens against the harsh oppressors that was the Southern white community. According to King, everyone being equal was never supposed to mean being identical.
Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking. but I must confess that I'm not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth.
Eugene Bull Connor was the Commissioner of Safety in Birmingham at the time. Although there had been efforts to eliminate him from his government job, Bull was still at it when King and his followers started protesting. He ordered attacks on them, sometimes often using fire hoses and K-9 units to inflict as much damage as possible on them before jailing them. One immediate impact of the expanding protests was the desegregation of lunch counters and other facilities in Birmingham. Bull Connor was overwhelmed and ultimately granted amnesty to the arrested protesters. A biracial committee was formed to confront the inequities faced by the black community. However, the fight for justice was far from over. Many Americans witnessed the televised footage of Bull Connor and his men using fire hoses and dogs against the protesters. The injustice of racism has been illuminated for most Americans. What the public saw happening in Birmingham sparked a nationwide civil rights movement. President Kennedy was deluged with telegrams from around the country expressing outrage. Kennedy's White House was forced to confront civil rights issues directly. One of the most influential moments of the civil rights movement was the August 28, 1963 March on Washington. Over 200,000 people showed up to lend their voice to the civil rights movement. Together, white and black citizens of the United States stood united and listened to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
President Kennedy proposed far-reaching civil rights legislation in June of 1963. Following his assassination, President Johnson took up the cause. Initially met with opposition by the southern states, the House approved the bill by a vote of 290 to 130. Initially met with opposition in the Senate, Southern Democrats staged one of the longest filibusters in U.S. histories. For 75 days, the filibuster went on. The initial vote was 73 to 27 in favor of the bill, and President Johnson signed it into law on July 2, 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, or sex. Martin Luther King Jr. worked hard during the civil rights movement to achieve equality for all. Through his explicit nonviolence techniques, King was able to make everyone in the United States realize how unfair and unjust any kind of segregation was. The letter from a Birmingham jail represented a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. As Dr. King's following expanded, the nation became aware of the injustices imposed on the black community.
Well, some say John was a Baptist. Some say John was a Jew. But I say John was a preacher, 'cause my Bible says so too.